All right, thank you. Good afternoon. I was a high-level Church of Scientology staff member for 27 years. I left in December of 2004. Do I need to wait for you? No? Okay. In the year 2000, there was a distinct point where the leader of Scientology, David Miscavige, who had gotten really solidified his power in an unquestioning fashion. And when he did so, he became increasingly more sociopathic, violent. He started creating a real dangerous cult situation at the international headquarters just outside of Los Angeles. I had been gone for 14 months in Clearwater working on other business and returned in late 2003 to find what I described then as an apocalypse now sort of situation, where virtually all of international management was locked up in a room about the size of this room right here, and there was 80 people forced to live there 24/7, sleep on the floors, have their food brought up to them, weren't allowed to leave for any reason. For day after day after day, the people were engaging in group confessions where people would have to get up, much like a North Korea POW camp, where people were gotten to get up in front of the rest of the people in the room and confess thought crimes against David Miscavige. And if the thought crimes were not juicy enough, or they did not, he didn't think they were revelatory enough, or they didn't match what he considered they ought to be, people were subjected to physical punishments. David Miscavige started it, physically beating people, physically strangling people, kicking people, and into December of December of 03 into January of 04, he then required that others do the same to others. Do I need to break it all, or do you?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
Let's have a break for short translation.
Okay. Two events happened at that time that led to me leaving the organization. I've spoke of one publicly before, and the other one occurred to me as I went through this for another time for Mrs. Caberta. First was my own activity in being involved in this. I was assigned specifically to physically beat Mike Rinder, who was the international spokesperson for Scientology, and I was assigned to do that by Miscavige because allegedly I would be the only person that would understand what his crimes are, because I worked closely with him on external facing matters. And Mike was a good friend of mine. I had worked closely with him for 2 decades, and I literally had him by the lapels. Do you want to continue? And I was shaking him and bouncing him off the floor. And for a moment, I kind of realized, I said, you know, this is so against my own nature. And I realized after 27 years, here I'm doing something that is so violently against my own nature and my own judgment that it made me pause and think and realize that, you know, there was something seriously wrong with my mind at that moment. And then it was about 2 days later that another event occurred, and that was another close friend of mine by the name of Tom DeVocht, who was a high Scientology manager, was brought before the entire group of 80 people. Have I gone before? Okay. And in order to make an example of him, Miscavige beat him ruthlessly in front of everybody with fists to the face, to the stomach, beat him to the ground, and began to kick him while he was on the ground. And I realized right then I either had to do something that I would probably regret in order to prevent this or to retaliate for it, or I'd have to remove myself from the environment. And so I decided right then and there to remove myself from the environment, and I essentially escaped from the international headquarters on my motorcycle, which is a whole story in itself, but that's essentially what occurred. For 3 years, I moved to the very south part of Texas near the border of Mexico because I just wanted to disappear and I didn't want to do any damage to Scientology, because even after I left, I never had any doubts about what I had gotten from the actual philosophy or the technology of Scientology. I was always able to differentiate that from the activity of the leader and the organization. But I was disconnected from anything to do with the organization for 3 years, and about that time, old friends found me who had followed suit and left the organization. And I learned in the year 2008, going to 2009, that in the years that followed, this scenario that I just described to you about what was going on at the international headquarters had actually deteriorated far beyond that. Mike Rinder left in 2007, and Tom DeVock left after I did, and Mark Headley, who's been here to Germany and spoke, and left after I did. And they described a scene that went beyond what I just did. People were literally being tortured at the direction of David Miscavige in the International Management headquarters. And I first spoke out in mid-2009 about what was going on, and at the time my motivation was that I was truly concerned that this was going to deteriorate into a Jonestown or a Waco or some huge infamous cult conflagration. And that was my initial motivation.